Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 3 of my build of the Fly from Monarch and doing my diorama. A lot of work on this video for my transporter. I complete most of it except for the top, the roof of it, including some pretty cool lighting that I do that I'll show you here shortly. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm working on the bottom of the transporter cabinet, and so what I did was I'm using the same rigid wood that I used for the walls, the two side walls that is sandwiched between the styrene sheet. I'm going to do basically the same thing. I've looked at the stills again and I've realized that, okay, so this square in the middle is the measurements of the cabinet, the walls. So it's 5 inches square, and then this would be the bottom, this would be the top. And there's an overhang, you can see right here, on both sides. So this side is where the other posts come up, 3 of them, and then you have extended off the little rack. And it looks like the rack is right out at the very edge of this. But the poles that support that are in here. There's 3 of them, and they come up and then they meet up at the top. And then the ridged side, or the side with the metal bars and the cables, are on this side. There's a bit of an overhang, also a bit of an overhang on the front and the back for the door, and the same with the top. So I made these two the same size, so when the top is on, it will match up with the same dimensions underneath. I'm going to have to look and see. This might be a little different. I'm going to have to play with it because it looks like on the side with the bars, the cables come up and go inside. I'll have to look at it and see. It might be a little different. So before I make that, I'm going to take a look at some more stills and maybe cut that down a little bit. But to start with right now, what I'm doing is I'm going to work on the base. And I cut a circle out of here because at the bottom there is some circular sections. Let me go ahead and go to that picture. We'll go to the still of that and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so the first thing I'm going to look at is the inside floor of the cabinet. You can see that there is a circular pad with a ring around it, and then several round pads sticking up around it as well. So that's why I cut out that circle, that I'll try to duplicate that detail there. Then I want to look at the cabinet on the other side, the second cabinet. You can see to the right where the cables go in, that wall is flush. So there isn't an overhang, so I'll end up cutting that off. But if you look at the bottom, there's definitely an overhang on the left side where the cooling racks are, but we cannot see the right side to be able to tell. But if we look at the front again, the front one, there is the ever slightly overhang there at the bottom that goes over to that section with the cables. But if we go up, we can't really see high enough to tell if it extends, and I don't think it does. I have no reason to believe that the cabinets aren't identical. One more detail. If you look at the back there, both of those, the bottom platforms, each side has 3 cylindrical, little round circles sticking out that I'm going to reproduce as well. All right, so just as those images showed, I had cut out the circle. What I'm going to end up doing is, this is going to have styrene glued onto it, just flat, smooth, just like I did on the walls. But this part here is going to be a little bit lower, and I'm going to glue styrene underneath, and then I'm going to put a pad in the middle, and I'm going to put the circular pads around it like you saw in the images. And then there is this little bit, actually this is reversed. Let me turn this around. So I was comparing what I called the front cabinet, the first cabinet, with the second cabinet in the other room that they rematerialize in. So they should be identical, they're just reversed. So you have the cooling rack on this side, on this one, it's on the opposite side on the other one. And then the power bar on this side and on this side. Okay, and they both have the doors that open on either side. So what I'm going to be doing then is on this one, of course, like I said, it looks like that overhang on the top is gone. So I'm going to cut this off and make this flush. And that way then that will be butt up against the top of this wall with the cables going into it. And these are going to be built up. So this isn't going to be flat. I'm going to take this styrene strip underneath and I'm going to put it all around the circumference, and then I'm going to build up styrene on the edges. And that's where it's going to have those little circles on it as well, going around. This one will have the same basic thing where I will build up the styrene, and then I'll leave a gap over in this side to look like the cables are feeding into it, and I'll fill in the detail there a little bit on the top. It kind of looks like the top is thicker than the bottom, but I'm probably going to leave it about the same. When I built the cabinet, I wish I had made it a little bit shorter and maybe a little bit less in the width as well, because these are going to make it thicker and higher, and I just don't want it to look abnormal compared to the figure. But we'll figure that out. I'll get that all working. But same situation. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll put like styrene strip around it, maybe put a couple supports in the middle, put a sheet of styrene over top of it, around the edges, and that kind of thing. So, all right. So the first thing I'm going to do is build up the bottom. And once I get that all done, then I can even begin gluing down the walls sections and the back door possibly. And then I can look at getting this completed and put on as well. And certainly to start working on the cooling racks and figure out how those are going to work. So, okay. All right, so I applied some styrene sheet. I glued down on top, and I left it rough. There's a little bit of an overhang. I thought that would be the easiest way to go about gluing on the side parts and then trimming it down and sanding it flush. And then what I also did was I finished this inner ring. So what I did was I took this wide styrene strip and I wrapped it around a tube and got it to have a curve in it. And then I just glued it around on the inside. I had to use a couple of pieces, so I had to join it together and sand the edges so it would match up. But it looks pretty good. I have to do a little bit more sanding to get it nice and smooth. But that'll be sunk down a little bit, and then I'll have a piece of styrene underneath it, which I already have drawn out. So this will go over top, or underneath, I mean. So in the end, it's going to look like that. So I want that set down inside because this has a circle pad in the middle, and then a bunch of little rounded pads going around it. And they're all level with this floor, but there's clearly, space in between them. So I thought that'd be the easiest way to go about it. And then what I came up with, and I looked around, and this often happens, you look around and see what you have in your home, and different things can work as parts that you wanted. So I was looking for something that would be the middle pad and work as the right size. And I found this cap, which was on a container of scenic sand that I got from Hobby Lobby. And it's perfect other than the height. It's round, it's flat, it has the straight edges. So very nice, very nice. And that'll be about the right size to go in the center, to be the center pad. And then what I can do is use this styrene tube to cut off different sections and have the rounded parts circling it all around. and I'll have to go back and look at the still again and count it and see how many there are and just evenly space them. And what I'll do with the tubing, just like I did with the square bars on the sidewall, once I get it cut to the right size, all the pieces, I'll take some styrene, glue it down to it, and sand off around the edges so I have what looks like a solid round pad. And I'm thinking about cutting out a circle, maybe some kind of black sandpaper or something, gluing it in the middle of this to give it kind of a rough texture to look like it's the pad in the middle. And then what I did was I took this, let me flip this over. So I lined this up against that edge, and I took a felt tip marker and I just spun it around and drew the line until I got a line around the circumference of how big it needs to be. So what I'll do is I'll use my Dremel to cut that part off. Only the top piece is going to be the part that's going to end up going into it, so it's flush. So when this is turned over and I put that down on there, right now it's too big, but once I cut it, it's going to be level with the rest of the platform. And I'll do the same thing with those little ones. So they'll all be level, and the rest of it will be open inside. And just kind of give me that effect. So, all right. But it's not really big. It's kind of a small area, as you can see what I have drawn off there. So, all right. So what I'm working on right now is I took some more of this ribbed styrene sheet that I had left over, and I cut out strips. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to glue these in along these edges. And then once those dry, I'm going to trim off the rest of the excess stripping or sheet, sand it smooth, and then I'll have a nice looking finished edge. It's hard to tell on the bottom if there's any detail. I know that what I showed in the previous one, that there are 3 rounded raised circles on each side. So I'll go ahead and reproduce those. But I thought it'd be cool to have this ridged looking detail on the sides to give it a little bit of character. The main part you're not going to see because most of it's going to be inside the cabinet, and you're just going to see the detail in the middle. And then this part over here is going to be smooth, but the majority of it's going to be covered with the walls. So I'm not worried about there being any detail up here. And I know that the roof one, the top one, is all smooth from what you can see, except underneath the overhang there appear to be some holes in it, probably indicating some kind of vents or something. So I'll probably end up doing that just to give it some character. But yeah, so adding on some really cool detail on this, getting close to finishing up the bottom base. And then once I do that, I will go ahead and get it painted first before I start gluing anything down onto it. And then I'll be able to glue the walls on and go from there. So, all right. All right, so a lot of scratch building, a lot of cutting of styrene, sanding, gluing, but I ended up with 12 of these, so I went ahead and drew them out. I was first thinking of 10, but then I realized that wasn't really going to space them out properly, so I did 12. And I started with, opposites, and then put some in between the ones that were there, and drew it out. And then I went through and cut this tube into 12 sections. And similarly, first I held the tube up to this one and I drew it off so it would be the right height for this. Then I went and I used each one that I cut to measure off the next one, and I used a pole saw to cut through it, and some sandpaper I put down and just rubbed it along it until it sanded it smooth. Once I got that all onto there, or all of them done, I glued them all down onto a thin piece of styrene sheet, cut them out, and then used an emery board to sand around the edges so that I would get a smooth edge and make it look like one solid piece, even though it's just a hollow tube. All right, so each of these, of course, are going to go in here. These might not be exactly perfect, but once I glue the center part in, I'll space them evenly around it so it looks good before I glue it into the part. Or what I might do is glue this into the part first and then just line it up, because it's going to have to match up with the edge as well. And then I took some gray sandpaper, I cut out a circle, and I glued it on the center of this. And then I took some thin styrene round stock, and I bent it around a rounded object to give it a curve and glued it down as well. And then finished off that edge so it looks more like a coal laking pad in the middle with some texture. And this will be painted. I'll paint this along with the rest of it when I paint it, and it should still maintain that texture in the middle to look really cool. So, all right. So all the components are done for the base. What I want to do is get this glued onto here. So I think I'm going to glue this onto this part first, then glue this underneath this, and then I can add each of these around it so I can properly space it between the center pad and this outer wall so it looks good. But just about ready to wrap up the this base. And as I showed in the previous stills, I finished up the surrounding parts. I still have to do the little rounded sections. I'll get that in the future, or I'll just use some styrene tube, some similar ideas, and glue three little rounded parts onto those sides as well. All right. And here is the completed bottom platform for my transporter. I really like how that turned out. That center pad looks really cool. Definitely looks like something realistic, machine that would actually do what you think it would do, be a transporter. I also like the idea that they had the rounded pad, very reminiscent, well, later on when Star Trek comes out, and they have a center pad where the people stand on for the transporter as well, which I think is kind of cool. So, all right. So let me go ahead and just kind of hold up the side walls onto this and the front glass door, side wall and front glass door, and show you how that's going to look. All right, and I'm just holding the left wall and the glass door in front of it, so that's going to look pretty sweet. You're going to see the mechanism inside there, which obviously does the disintegration, reintegration. So, all right, really happy with how this looks. I just need to go ahead and get a coat of paint on that once it dries completely, and then we'll get that painted up as well. All right, so I skipped over a few parts here while I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do this. I initially got a black base color on the base with my spray can, and then I went back and I sprayed over with some of the Vallejo steel, and you can kind of see on the sides that's how it turned out as far as the color. So I like that color. The whole thing is that color, but I didn't like the big gaps in between these circles in the center pad, and so I was trying to think of some way to fill that in. Still considering possibly with maybe some two-part resin, something like that would fill it in evenly around the circles. It's a hard area to fill in. I was thinking of some ideas with some of this diffusion paper to put on, because what I want to try to do is looking to light this. So I have this set of 4 lights from Evan Designs, and these ones just happen to be orange, but they're what they call breathing. So if I can get a good look on that. So you can see they just sort of pulse on and off. There we go. So it's cool. It's a slow fade on and off, and I don't have to go with the orange. What I can do is it has like a circuit board, which is what this little thing is here. So this controls the fading on and off for all the lights. And all you have are 4 of them connected in, all of them connected in with the red and the black. So what I can do is snip these off, use them for something else, and just connect my own on in their place. And so I'm debating on what color to do. So I went back and I looked at the film again, and I looked at the scene. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so here's the only scene that we see where the large transporter is being used and he's inside of it. So when it first begins, we get a blue glow, as you can see here, and that really is blue. It's not just the TV looking that way on the film. Then it gets brighter and it gets like a really white light at the end. But it definitely has a bluish look, really blue at the beginning. And you can even see at the top, there's a bunch of little tiny lights up there, which is kind of cool. I never noticed that. Probably not going to worry too much about what those are, but other than that, it definitely looks like it's a bluish glow. So that's the color I'm going to try to go for as far as the pulsating glow on the bottom pads of it. All right, so I think I'm going to go with the blue. I think that'll look good with the steel metallic as well. But what I wanted to try to do is get a nice white background. So I went ahead and taped all this off, and I taped off the tops of all these little pads here so they stay the metallic. And I painted some white, as you can see, letting that dry. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start working with the lights and try to figure out how I want to do this. What the idea that I'm thinking of is drilling some holes down below and having the lights coming up from the bottom. And then I'm thinking about using, I do have some clear 2-part resin that you mix together and it hardens. You can't do it too thick or it gets really hot, and I'm afraid it would melt some of these and have a bad effect, so I don't want to do that. I want to be careful. But if I can embed the lights inside of a clear and kind of level it out, let it be self-leveling, then it'll glow from underneath and have a cool effect. So, all right, I'm going to keep playing with that and then see what we come up with here. All right, so as I showed in the previous stills, I installed 8 lights inside of here. Now, because I have 12 of these little raised domes, which means there's 12 spaces between them, I didn't have that many Mega SMDs. In fact, I only had 4 blue ones, which are these ones here, the white looking ones in between. I had 4 cool white megas, which I put around the edges. I didn't want to do 12 because I thought that would be overkill, but I figured I would just do enough so it's a nice evenly distributed set of lights. And I had to drill holes into the back of this inner ring to accommodate them, and then have the wires come out through the bottom. So right now I have it taped down onto my cutting board here, and what I'm going to do now is I did a test, and I took some of my really good clear resin, put a little bit of blue into it, and I put it into some styrene and let it dry overnight so that it hardened, and it came out perfect. It's nice and smooth, not tacky at all, and it is clear. I pulled off some of that to kind of show that it's clear blue. And it was mostly a test to make sure that it wouldn't, the heat from it wouldn't melt the styrene, which is the same styrene I used here, and also some on the bottom, and it didn't do anything to it, but it came out perfectly. So what I'm going to do now, I have all the lights in, and I sealed up the holes with 5-minute epoxy all around, so none of it's going to leak out. I'm going to mix up another batch of the clear resin with a little bit of blue in it, and I'm going to go ahead and gently pour it in around these and just let it self-level and kind of raise it up as high as I can without going over top of these parts right here. And this part here is even higher up, so it's not in any danger of being covered or anything like that. So I'm going to pull up the edges of the tape a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and put that on there, let that harden completely overnight. And then I'll be able to remove all of this tape and have a really cool looking inset of the clear blue. And the lights are going to shine through it, obviously. And then I can get all of these lights wired into the breathing circuit, and then that way I can have them all breathing all together. I was going to put some blue, clear blue Tamiya over top of the white ones, but I'm out of it right now, and I think it'll be fine. It'll give it a little bit different of a light source. It'll still be fairly even because you're going to have 4 blues equidistant and 4 of the whites equidistant. So I think it'll be fine once I get that blue inside of there. And the main idea is I want to have that pulsing blue while breathing on and off, kind of a blue look from the pads, giving you the idea that the machine is either powering up or it just finished and powered down. So, all right. All right, so I poured the blue resin, let it harden overnight, and it's set up. Now, I had some issues, as you can see, but nothing I can't repair. So the main thing that happened, well, first of all, when I pulled the tape off, a lot of this paint came off of this center pad. I think because this plastic cap is not really styrene and the paint doesn't adhere that well to it, I did use a spray can of black on it first, which is a pretty hardy paint, and then I used the Vallejo steel over top of it. This ring also had come loose, so I had to glue it back down. Also, I had a little bit of overspill around where the tape was that I had to use my Dremel and sand it smooth. And I didn't like that rough edge, so I went ahead and took some styrene stripping and I curved it, glued it down onto here, cleaned up any edges that had a problem, as you can see where the paint is sanded off. So this is all sanded and smooth. It looks rough, but it's actually smooth again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off the center ring, and then I'm going to mask, well, basically going to mask off this whole blue part in the middle. I'm going to go back over and I'm going to repaint the steel over all of this and the whole center ring. The ones under here are fine as far as I can tell. I only took off one so far, but I want to leave those on for now. And then what I want to do is, because I created a lip and I didn't fill up enough of the resin, so what I want to do is just do it just a little bit more, perhaps a darker blue, and go ahead and just evenly spread it out over this. Now what I'll do is take these, once I get these painted, I'll take these off, and then the resin will slightly cover those, but you'll still be able to see them beneath the blue. And then I think I'll be all set after I get this all touched up. So let me get this touched up first, and then we'll go ahead and finish up the doing the resin. And also, once I paint it, I'll be painting this ring too. So I'll tape around just up to the edge of this ring. So this ring will be painted the steel also all around it. So, all right. Right, so I cleaned up the bad spots as I showed, and I went back and I masked it off and painted it. Got a nice silver, smooth appearance again. And I went ahead and poured a little bit darker blue of the clear, and that dried overnight and set up. It's all nice and smooth and shiny, as you can see. Very cool. So I'm happy with most of it. I'm still not overly happy with this center part. For one thing, this is kind of obviously not perfect, and you can still see some of the paint parts that I didn't clean up as well as I could have. So I don't want to try to clean that up anymore. It's a straightforward kind of a part that just has the sandpaper and a ring and some rings around it. So what I did was I made a separate piece using some styrene strip and styrene sheet, and then I just put the sandpaper on the back and I painted it. On the center, I did put a little bit of a different color, some gray, and then when I put the steel over it, it looks like it's a little bit worn or dirty or dingy. So what I'm going to do now that I've got that done and I like it better, I'm going to peel off this strip and the sandpaper until I get back to the lid part, and I'm just going to glue this piece and center it right in the center. So I get a better looking piece that has a finished edge to it, because I also don't like that this edge isn't finished. It's even with the clear resin, but it's not finished. So that should get that to work for me. It's really hard to get a perfect circle and get it to be exactly right, but this one's a lot closer to what I want it to be than what I have there now. So let me get those pieces off, and then I'll just use some 5-minute epoxy and glue this down. And then that'll finish up this part as far as the painting and the resin and everything. I'm also considering, once I get this glued on, considering pouring just a little bit of resin in this outer ring, but we'll see, maybe not. I think that'll be too much. I think it'll take away from the rest of it, so I probably won't, but all right, let me go ahead and work on that. All right, and here is the newer center pad glued down with 5-minute epoxy. Letting that set up. I think they turned out really nice. It's pretty awesome. So the last thing I have to do is get the wires together at the bottom. Well, most of them. So I have the 2 different sets of 4 wired into one set of red and black. So I have to get the breathing circuit wired into those 2 and then into a power source, and then I'll go ahead and show you how this looks with the breathing SMDs inside of the clear blue resin. All right, there you go. So they're fading on slightly and then going off again. The white ones, the cool white ones, did not come out as bright because they're deeper in the resin, but it's still a really cool effect, and I like how that's just glowing under the really cool clear blue machinery there. All right, so I'm working on the cooling racks that I'm calling them for the right side if you're facing the transporter. So there are 3 sections, and I showed that in the previous still. And so I finished one of them. It's pretty stable, it's pretty sturdy. This is all styrene rod. So what I did first is I drew out the way that it would work. So I traced out the panel that it's going to be going over. I went in and I did some measurements, and I figured out how big I wanted them to be, how long, how much space between them. And I drew out all the individual lines, including the little angled ones down here at the bottom and on the top, as you can see. So what it ended up coming out as are 3 main square sections, rectangular, I mean. So here's the biggest one. So I just did the outside part and just glued it onto it. Here's the mid-size, goes in the middle of it. And then there's a little one that goes in the center of that. So I did that 3 times, so I got 3 sets. And then there's the center piece, which is just 1 rod that goes in the middle. It's actually 7. So, but they don't all go through, as you can see. So the longest ones are on the outside. So what I figured out was 6 that were 9.5 inches, which is the outside ones, the length. Then the next one in are 9.25, then 9 inches for this piece, and then the center rod is 8.5. So what I did was I just cut those out, and like I said, I glued these together. So this is a set right here that's ready to go, and right now this set I'm putting together, the second one. So what I'm doing is starting at the top, and I'm using some tape to keep it situated, but I line it up with the lines so I know that they're square, and I overlap a little bit with this piece here so it sticks out a bit, and then I just trim it off when I'm done and sand that corner. So I'll let that dry a little bit. So what I'll do next is I will line each of these up with the lines, as you can see, and then do the horizontal one right here, this bar. Do this one, then I'll do this one, and each time I'm bringing them together and lining them up, and then when I'm done, I'll do the bottom and just do the angled parts on the bottom. So, all right. So I have one completed, and I'm working on the other 2, and then I'll be using a thicker rod here on the back and support it in 4 places that will then attach it to the main rod that goes in the top and the bottom. So, all right. And here are the 3 finished cooling racks. Turned out really nicely. And I'm just sitting them on top of this part. They're going to be in front of this, but they're not going to be attached to this. So looking at the stills from the film, each of these has a big bar coming down, metal tube or whatever, and then they're connected in the center. So they're connected in 1, 2, 3, 4 spots with some other extended tubes, and so they're sticking out. So they'll be sticking out like this, well, even further. They stick out over top of that overhang part that I made on the bottom and on the top when I make the top. So they'll be sticking out considerably. And then the big thick tube that they're onto is not actually attached into this wall, but they're attached in the top and the bottom of the platforms. And then these are on the bar. These are on that big tube. They're attached on with some other tubes. But these turned out really nicely. So I'll let those fully set up overnight. And then tomorrow I will start working on getting the rest of the tubes glued onto them. And once I do that, then I can get them painted. And then they'll be ready to go, as is the other side with the cables that I have ready to go for that once I get it attached. And then I'll just have to work on the top of the transporter. And then there won't be a lot of detail on the top. It'll mostly just be sort of like the bottom, a thicker piece, but it will obviously accommodate these sticking into it. And the cables on the other side will go up into it as well. So, all right, but just about coming towards finishing up this transporter cabinet. All right, so I'm finishing up the cooling racks. So I've taken this thicker round tube, not tube, it's a solid rod. And I first of all cut out these little pieces, all the same size. And then I took this rounded needle file, and I just held the edge of it and I just sanded along it until I got a bit of a rounded groove in the end. Is that the focus? Okay. But that way, so it'll fit rounded, it'll fit onto the rounded rod that it's going into. So I have 4 of them, as you can see. and they match up with each of these horizontal parts. And then the bigger rod then glues into it, and I rounded out the edge of each side so it has a nice solid fit into both of those rods. And then it extends on the top and the bottom a little bit, about a 1/2 inch on either end, because there's about 1/4 inch difference between the top and bottom of the rack and the actual base and when I finish the roof of the transporter. But I want it to be a little longer, so I'm going to have holes drilled into it so these extend into it, and I'll have to get a thinner tube that goes on the ends that caps it off when it finishes onto it. So this one's done, looking pretty cool. And I'm working on the other two, so I have little pieces done and I have the longer rods cut. So let me go ahead and get those glued together, and we'll finish up these parts, and then they'll be ready for painting. All right, and here are my 3 completed coaling racks on the supporting bars. I just have them leaning up against that that right side wall. They're actually not going to be touching the wall. They're going to be extended out, and there they go falling. And there they go. They're going to be extending out and actually be attached at the bottom and the top of the bottom platform and the top ceiling part. So these are going to be out about maybe a 1/2 inch. And it's about 1 inch space coming out from the on the bottom, that little beveled part that sticks out. So these are going to actually be down inside. Hi, kitty. But there they are. They're all completed on their back posts. So these are going to be painted like a chrome, not a chrome silver, but a shinier silver. This back post is going to be a dark gray. And then the connecting little posts are going to be silver as well, which is how they look in the film. So there's all 3 of them all completed, ready to go. Go away, kitty, you can't have these cooling racks. And so what I'm going to do is get those painted, and I still have to come up with a little rounded part that goes on the bottom. It looks like in the film that there's a little teeny kind of a ring that goes around it, and that'll hide the hole as well, because I'll have a hole drilled into the top and the bottom platform so that these 2 parts go into them. And then these aren't actually attached to this wall at all. They're sticking out from it. There is like one little connector. It looks like a yellow insulated part or something, maybe supposed to be like a connector to it. So I'll look at that again. Maybe you have just something coming through at the bottom, that sort of thing. And that would add a little bit of color too, just a minor bit of color if it was yellow. So, all right, but looking really cool. Let me go ahead and get these painted as well. And here are the painted cooling racks. You can see they have a shiny look on them. I use Vallejo chrome from Model Air to paint the silver parts or the chrome parts. So definitely a shinier silver than the rest of the transporter cabinet. Then when that was done, I masked off all the areas except for the back pipe, and I painted that with a Vallejo gray blue, dark gray blue, sorry. So I think it looks pretty cool. And those rings on the end, I showed in a previous still. I did basically the same idea that I did with the bottom platform, those little rounded parts that stick out on the sides. There's 3 on each side. So I took a piece of tube and I used my pole saw to cut off a little bit of it, and I sanded them all the same size, glued them down onto some thin styrene sheet, cut them out, sanded them, and then once I got a bigger piece, I drilled a hole through so it fit over top of this rod. Because you can see it's bigger, it's considerably bigger. If I just used a piece of tube that fit over that, it would have been a very thin sheath over it, and it wouldn't have been as pronounced. And then I put them down onto some holes I drilled into the bottom platform. And I have some on the top piece that I'll show in a moment here. And I put them where I positioned them where they needed to be and glued them in place before I painted it. All right, but all three of these are all done, ready to go. So let me go ahead and get those put onto, let's mock up the transporter with those different walls. And I'll put these on and show you the progress that I have and how that's gonna look. And here is a mock-up of my transporter that I've completed so far. Pretty much all the sides now are ready to go, with the exception of some of these, like the cooling racks are going to have to be put in once the ceiling is done. The roof isn't done, of course. I just have a board up there right now. I did drill some holes in it for the top of the post for the racks to go into, and there's a hole at the bottom, so it's simply suspended between the two. It doesn't actually attach onto this wall here. And I just taped on the wiring bundles, which are going to feed into the top of this. I'm going to have openings for those to feed in and attach in. They're going to come down, and then they're going to gather together and bundle back towards the back of the transporter. All right, but looking pretty sweet. And I have the lights. Put on a little battery here. Sorry, I'm just holding it on. There we go. So I have the lights on it. Looking pretty cool. All right, so real happy with that so far. Looking fantastic. I won't actually attach these walls on until I get the base going, and here's like a beginning of it, using some styrene with a pattern in it for the floor. It'll be onto this piece of plywood, and then I'll have a hole underneath for the wiring to go through for the lights, of course. So until I get that attached down, I'm not going to attach the walls onto this. Plus I have to figure out the rest of the arrangement of how this is going to be arranged on the base and all that. So, but looking pretty sweet at this point. Fantastic. And there is my fly figure in front of his mostly completed transporter cabinet, disintegrator, reintegrator. I will insert a Lou Del Maso level pun here. He's looking pretty fly for a fly guy. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Oh, man. And no, I'm sorry, Mr. Fly, I have not found the tragic man fly yet to put in the cabinet again to run you through. Don't worry, we'll find it. Just stay away from the axe. Don't chop it up. We'll be okay. So, looking pretty sweet. All right, so some really good progress. Giant cat. Some really good progress on this. Really liking how that's looking. I think the diagram is going to look pretty sweet when it's done. Alrighty. All right, so that's going to wrap up the video for this segment. A lot of great progress on this transporter. I'll be able to finish that up here pretty soon, and then start working on the other elements of the base and getting it completed. So really happy with how that's turning out. And I will be doing more work on my pod builds, my 2001 large Mobius pods and the smaller one. So I'll be uploading some more video on that next time and pretty soon. But also continuing work on the fly. All right, well, thank you to all my new subscribers, and I will see you in the next video.